So, welcome. Good to see a lot of faces that I know and some new people as well. I'm here today with Dr. Katie Leary. She is Director of Nursing Programs at the American Nurses Association and a former CNO. So she has sat in this seat, a lot of experience in the healthcare setting. And I'm also with Dr. Chaudron. She is Chief Nurse Executive with Temple University Health System. But then we're going to be talking about, about this upheaval and their experiences with it and some advice. So, Dr. Carter, I want to start with you. You recently, not too long ago, had a revolt or a upheaval with your nursing workforce at a very inopportune time. Not that there's ever a good time to have your nursing workforce revolt, but this was particularly kind of a vulnerable time. And you navigated through this process and worked with them to achieve a win. So can you tell us kind of what was going on and what were some of the things that you did that to move forward?
Sure. Thank you for having me. It was more of a perfect storm. We were going through contract negotiations. Prior to negotiations, we knew our contract was coming to an end. We proposed a $5 increase to the nurses and for an extension, a year extension of the contract, because we were just coming out of COVID and we were trying to get staffing up to guidelines, and it was denied. And it was denied from the union's perspective because we also had our allied health professionals also, their contract was also ending. And so we go to the negotiations table with two separate contracts. And so they denied the proposal because they were standing united with each other. And so after, having conversations about the proposal, we knew that we were going to face an uphill battle in terms of negotiating contract. During the same time, the Magnet conference happened to be in Philadelphia at that same time. And we were really stalled at the table. And I say the union and staff felt that we as leaders were not listening or hearing them. And on the other side of the table, we felt the same. And we had gotten word that the team, the union and the staff were going to picket picket outside of the Magnet conference, which they did. And we were a host hospital in addition to that. And we had about, on the day of the picket, we had about 25, 30 staff members there. Very embarrassing moment for the organization, but we kept our head held high and we, enjoyed the conference as much as we could. We came back to the table and there was no mention of the protest at all. We didn't say anything about it and neither did the union. And we just started to negotiate as normal. I think it was the lines of being open. We were able to not get ratios in our contract, which is huge. In fact, we settled on just guidelines and some language around guidelines and what does it look like for our organization. And I think that's how we were successful. That was the stall point, staffing. It wasn't about, but it wasn't a financial impact because we had already given, when we came to the table, we put on the table the $5 that was previously shot down. And then we came with the $5 plus, a percentage of cost of living percentage. Initially, our proposal for a financial proposal was denied. They initially came to the table with the 18% increase, and no organization can afford an 18% increase across the board for your nurses. So eventually, they accepted the $5 plus. I think we did 3% the first year, 3.5% the next year, and 2.75 the third year. So we got a 3-year contract. Out of the negotiations, they gave back some of their financial components that they were asking us for in terms of a ratification bonus and some of those things. But I think it was very tough for us. We stayed strong. We stayed committed to patient safety. We stayed committed to making sure that our nurses knew that we knew that we had staffing challenges, and we knew that we needed to do something around staffing. And so we came up with a proposal. We meet with the union every month for 4 hours to talk about staffing. We have a plan on how we're going to meet the guidelines. And that was on both ends. We kind of had to give and take. And, when you're in a union environment, you're going to have to agree to disagree on some things. And some things you just say to yourself and the team, we're not going to die on this hill, and we'll give in and move forward for the patients that we service, the community that we service, and for our staff. We have to recognize that those union leads that are at the table is not a full collection of the thoughts of our full staff. And so you still have to be the image, even in the midst of the challenges of negotiating. You're still leaders, and you're still in the midst of negotiating contract, but you still have others behind you that are watching. And so it took, long hours. This is the longest I've been at Temple for 8 years. I've done 3 contracts. This is by far the most challenged of the contracts that I've negotiated here. And it can be done. It can be done without a strike. And yes, we heard that they were going on a strike, and they gave us a 10-day strike notice. But we, stood firm on our beliefs, and the things that we were able to give, we stood on those, and eventually the union bought in and said that they were going to agree. It was really the last day of contract negotiations, and the tables turned in our favor.
Specifically, how do you convey no in a positive way? Because there are things that you just can't accept, like the staffing ratios that had to be. And how do you get some wins? How do you negotiate through this when it's really difficult and tenuous?
Yeah, a lot of it is giving the why behind the reason why we can't do certain things, and the implications if we agree. Down the line, it might not be the implications immediately, but the implications for the whole health system. We're 6 hospitals in, so if there are things that we do for one union, it has implications for all 6 campuses. And so there are times where we had to say no because it was an implication of other campuses and other unions that we have in our health system.
And Chaudron, you had mentioned to me about that how communication was so key, and how listening to them. And I think you had said something very interesting. We thought we were listening to them, but we did not hear them. And how did you work through that communication to hear what their needs were, and at least get some wins to kind of be able to move forward?
Yeah, we reached out to the union president and had a side conversation around, what can we do as a leadership team to move this forward? And the president of our union stated that she wanted us to work together on some language around guidelines, because we were adamant that we were not putting ratios in our contract. And that creates implications for many other things across Philadelphia, across Pennsylvania, and across those those organizations that have this particular union in their organization. And so we stood firm on that. So she came back and she said, is there any way we can look at a plan, looking at a guidelines and looking at a plan for which we review those guidelines and a process by which we get to the certain number of nurses that each unit needs. And so we agreed to that. And we sat down one morning with her and a couple of her designees, and we went through a proposal. And we officially just wrote the article right there at the table with their input. And so that was key for us with getting through negotiations, just pulling her, and I'll say her, the president aside, to say, what would it take? And sometimes you can't wear your chip on your shoulder. You have to say, what are we going to do to get through this? And that was that communication piece that we had with her to say, how are we going to make it through this? And, essentially they proposed, a way in which we could do it, and we bought into it, and we got the contract negotiated.
Oh, that's amazing. Katie, you have a national perspective on this, and you're seeing upheaval across the nursing workforce and encroaching union activity. That's been a topic of our chief nursing officer exchange for the past couple of years. We're seeing more and more union activity across healthcare organizations. So talk about what's behind all this upheaval, this discontent. Is it just about the money?
No, and let me start with thank you, Julie. Let me start with thanks for having me on, and I'm really excited to be here with my esteemed colleague, Dr. Carter Short. I do from our intelligence, and I'm weaving in my recent experience prior to joining ANA as a CNO at a unionized organization. I see some parallels with what I experienced as CNO and some of what's happening, the growing concerns across the country, and also with what was just shared. And what we're seeing right now, and the difference, I think, in the shift, I'll say shift, is during the height of the pandemic, there was nurses were seeking more support from the public, right, in helping with addressing some of the requirements to be safe and not getting infected with COVID and taking the vaccine and things like that. Now nurses are seeking support from their employers. And to Chaudron's point about how nurses felt they were speaking, but they weren't feeling heard, that is showing up a lot in our data. And we did recently conducted a national survey, and we got 14,000 nurses to participate in this survey. And that's the number one issue. Nurses don't feel that they're being listened to. They don't feel that they're being heard. And then when you dig a little deeper in terms of what's behind all that, there's a feeling that they're not respected, not just by their employers, but by some of their peers, from people, the patients that they care about, and their managers, right? We're hearing we're seeing data where nurses feel that there is some violence, form of verbal abuse coming from their managers as well, that we need to also be mindful of. And it's not, some of it, when you really look at some of the feedback, it's not intended, but it comes across as abusive language. Also hearing about how verbal racism has persisted and worsened since the pandemic. We've seen that nurses feel that they need more support from their employers. Not that they feel that things are not being done, but are they the things that matter and that can have an impact? Because when you look at the data that we collect in terms of what nurses feel that they would help their well-being and their mental health, almost everything that they list that helps strengthen their overall well-being sits outside of where they work. It's spending time with my family, being in nature, talking to the people that I care about and love, spending time with my pets. And 12 to 14 hours that nurses tend to work, particularly in the acute care setting, is a long time to not get any well-being needs having that met. So how do we get to that integration? of well-being in the workplace that also is something that nurses can take advantage of. We're hearing nurses say that those rooms that were set up for them, they can't use them. They're too busy. And it's all about how we can manage what leads to burnout, those systemic issues, those process issues that makes it hard to do the simplest things, where nurses are the go-to for everything they feel, because particularly when it comes to adverse events, action plans, other departments, the support they need, or when there isn't that support from those ancillary departments, nurses have to fill those gaps. All those things tend to play into why nurses feel that they're not being listened to and they're going to the last resort, which is what Dr. Carter Short experienced herself, or was able to avert herself. So this is a conversation about, even though we're talking about a unionized organization, there are two different groups, right? In terms of employers, there are the groups that have unions and the ones that don't. And the ones that don't are putting in all the best efforts and investments to prevent having union activity. But part of what you need to get to, which is great about your question, is what is at the helm of all this, or the center of all this? And lastly, I also say, in terms of salary, that was part of the negotiations that Carter Short mentioned. Our data shows that nurses feel that their financial well-being got worse over the last 4 surveys that we did on this question. And a lot of it has to do with nurses carrying student loan debt, how inflation has increased. If you think about all the services that nurses tend to partake in so they can be at work, childcare, elder care, and things like that, because of the shortages that those industries have faced, the costs for those have gone up. Not to mention also the price of goods. So all those things come into play as to why nurses are looking to increase their salaries. It's not greed. We have data that shows that nurses are barely above where they should be in terms of their cost of living expenses, and the fact that most nurses from our data, a number of nurses, I shouldn't say most, are primary breadwinners, and they also take on side gigs or second jobs to make ends meet.
So what's the message here we have a lot of CEOs, CFOs, we have a senior level leaders on this call. What's the response to this?
Is that for me or?
Yes.
So I think the first response is, and this is a big one because it's not a single answer, but staffing is that every time you try to have a discussion with nurses, staffing is the number one issue. It's impacting their well-being. It's impacting their willingness to show up every day. They don't know what it's going to look like when they show up at work. We have to get a handle on that. And I know it's not easy because multi-layered issues required multi-layered solutions. And this is not something that happened overnight. But to Dr. Carter's comment about how, even though ratios was not a part of the final agreement or contract, it's also about making sure that nurses are at the table where they are being communicated to, and they are part of the solution. And there's transparency in sharing some of the challenges, and also some of those, and getting ideas from them in terms of what the solutions are. Now, I know a lot of us on this call say, well, we already do that. But I really like us to challenge ourselves in thinking about how we can address it in a different way. The other thing is that ANA did release think tank recommendations after working with various stakeholders to understand what could be done to address the short-term issues related to staffing. Encourage you to take a look at that. We can share that after this call, where it gets to some of the short-term solutions to address the healthy work environment, total compensation, just some low-hanging fruit type strategies that could be implemented in less than a year. Outside of that, we have a task force that we concluded recently, and we'll be publishing some longer-term solutions to get us out of this place that we've been in for decades. So I think if we look at those low-hanging fruit type of things, I think that will be a way, and check those off as you accomplish them and share them with your teams. That will be a way to get, at least to start to turn a tide on this issue.
Let them know that you're hearing them and that you're responding to what they're asking. So, and Dr. Carter, that also, you took a negative situation and had to rebuild some trust and relationships between your nursing workforce and the leadership. How do you move forward in a positive way? Because there's some, trust that's been kind of broken, and the relationships might be a little more fragile. How did you kind of move this into a positive direction?
Yeah, and I want to mention that during this time, I was the Associate Chief Nursing Officer. I just moved into this role. My predecessor left the organization. And so I have now the luxury of saying, let's start anew. And we can't change what happened 3 years ago, but we can definitely understand the impact it has on us right now. And really opening up the dialogue. I think having those key stakeholders as the persons that we go to for information, making sure we hear them. I think with just piggybacking off of what Dr. Leary stated, it's low-hanging fruit most of the time. And really challenging ourselves to think out the box around what communication strategies we are using. We as leaders believe we are doing the most communication we can at any given time. But in these times, we have to over communicate. We have to bring those nurses into the fold. We have to put them at the table. Sometimes it's a different strategy than what we've used in the past. Many times in unionized organizations, some organizations don't want the union to know but so much. But I think building that relationship is key. Bringing them in, even when your contract is silent on certain issues, always looping them in to get feedback, not directive, but hey, this is what's going on. What do you think? That starts to build trust, and that starts to build relationships. And I begin to do those, and they've been actually, I've been receiving positive feedback and positive experiences from some of the opportunities that we have. As an example, I was on a call today with our union lead, and we were discussing a particular issue. And I just turned to tables and I said, well, what do you guys think? How should we do this? And that just opened up a world of communication. And then I got a bunch of text messages afterwards, just saying, well, thank you. Thank you for asking us, how do we recruit? How can we recruit? What can we do to help you? The union, and I kind of tell my leaders, we can't see the union as an evil force that's here with us. That is not it. They essentially want the same things we want, but in a different way. They want patient safety, they want staffing, they want a financial, they want it be financially sound. We all want all of that too, as leaders. And so I think breaking down those silos and not looking at the union as our enemy. They're here, they're in our organization, particularly mine. I have 6, and 5 of them are unionized. They're here to stay, and how do we work through it? I think bringing them into the fold, having those conversations, even though at many times they're challenging conversations, but they lead to better outcomes.
And both of you have mentioned to me about not personalizing, that some leaders have, and even refuse to even be around. And so because they didn't want to have to deal with it. So Jim had a question about Jim Wolpus, about ultimately the nurses. Chaudron it came down to some additional investment. How responsive was your executive team in this process, particularly the CEO and CFO?
So those that are unionized know, when you're negotiating contract, you always have a contingency plan, right? And the contingency plan was to use agency. Again, perfect recipe. The agency costs were through the roof. So if we went on strike, we were going to triple the amount of money that we were going to use just to get us through negotiations, and then didn't know the financial impact on the other side of ratifying a contract. And so it was key for us, and I say leadership, our chief financial officer and CEO, was to make sure that we didn't strike, but we did it in a fiscally responsible way. And we were not going to, accept all of their requests, but we understood that if we went on strike, it was going to be a hard impact to the organization.
We just have a couple of minutes left. So any other just final thoughts or advice that y'all would have for these senior level leaders? Katie?
Yeah, I just think that we have to recognize that the future is now. We have to think differently about a number of things that we traditionally held as true that are no longer. We have to think about employing nurses in a number of different ways through contracts. We're following data with nurses that are doing contracts similar to anesthesiology groups. So we have to think about what different types of employee contracts would look like, and just be open to changes happening now, and be willing to do some forced experimentation with new things and engaging nurses along the way, and over communication for sure.
And Dr. Carter, any other closing thoughts?
No, I think I would second what Dr. Leary stated. Communication is key. Being able to build relationships, know your key stakeholders, try to make sure you have your ear on the pulse about what's going on in your organization. Getting out there, talking to staff, and really understanding what they're going through.
If there's any other questions, please let us know. Like I said, we've got about 1 minute left. And again, we are recording this, so we will have this recording available. Really appreciate everyone taking the time to attend today. We do have these monthly community calls. They're 30 minutes that you can join. Abby Mathis, my colleague, will be sending out an invitation to the next one on successful recruiting and onboarding. Also, please email Abby. She's the one who sent you this invitation. We do have live executive roundtables, our exchange program for C-level executives, and we have several coming up. If you are interested in joining in one of these roundtables, like I said, please send Abby a message and she will get you some information about them. And with that, thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate your time, and thank you again, Dr. Leary and Dr. Carter. Really appreciate y'all's insight. This was incredible. So have a nice afternoon, and hope you all have happy nurses.
Hang in there.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.